The doctor almost walked out of the room. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if he had. He had already finished reading my ultrasound report. The technician had smiled. The nurse had started removing the gel from my stomach. My husband Caleb was already reaching for my shoes. Everything about that morning suggested we would be home within 20 minutes. Then the doctor stopped at the door. He turned around, walked back to the ultrasound screen, and stared at one tiny gray shadow that nobody else had paid attention to. "What week did you say she was?" he asked. 32, the technician answered. He nodded without speaking. For nearly a minute, he studied the frozen image. I looked at Caleb. He shrugged. Neither of us thought much about it. Pregnancy had taught us that doctors often looked at things longer than necessary. It was normal, or so we believed. Finally, the doctor looked at me. "Mrs. Miller." His voice was calm. "I'd like to repeat this scan myself." The technician looked surprised. "We already measured everything." "I know. I didn't see anything concerning." "I know." He smiled politely. "I'd still like another look." The room suddenly felt different. Not frightening, just quieter. He picked up the ultrasound probe himself. Cold gel touched my skin again. He slowly moved the probe across my stomach. His eyes never left the screen. He pressed slightly harder, changed the angle, measured something, measured it again. Then he became completely still. Caleb finally spoke. "Is something wrong?" The doctor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked another question. "Has anyone mentioned unusual pain? No? Bleeding? No? Dizziness?" I shook my head. "I felt great. And baby's movement? He kicks all day." The doctor nodded. Then he quietly called the nurse back into the room. "I'd like maternal fetal medicine to review these images." The nurse blinked. "Today? Now." She left without another question. I looked at Caleb. Neither of us smiled anymore. The room had gone from routine to something neither of us understood. An hour earlier, we'd been arguing about baby names during breakfast. Caleb wanted Noah. I preferred Samuel. We laughed all the way to the hospital. "This will be our easiest appointment," he had said. 10 minutes in, 10 minutes out. I laughed because every appointment before this one had been exactly that. Healthy heartbeat, healthy growth, healthy pregnancy. I had never missed a prenatal visit. Every blood test was normal. Every scan had been reassuring. Even my blood pressure was perfect. As a former Amish woman, hospitals still felt unfamiliar. I had grown up believing pregnancy belonged at home. Most women I knew gave birth surrounded by family instead of machines. Leaving that life had changed many things. I learned to trust medicine, to ask questions, to understand that modern care wasn't something to fear. Still, walking into hospitals always made me slightly nervous. Perhaps because they reminded me how little control any of us truly have. The specialist arrived 20 minutes later. She introduced herself, then reviewed the images. She looked thoughtful. Not alarmed, just thoughtful. Finally, she looked at the first doctor. "I see what you're talking about," he nodded. "What exactly are you seeing?" Caleb asked. The specialist turned toward us. "There appears to be a very small area where blood flow may not be reaching part of the placenta the way we'd expect." My stomach tightened. What does that mean? It may mean nothing. Another sentence I instantly disliked. It could simply be the baby's position. She paused. "But I'd like additional imaging." I looked at Caleb. He squeezed my hand. "Okay, the additional scan lasted almost 45 minutes. Different machines, different angles. Different doctors entered and left. Nobody seemed rushed, but nobody seemed relaxed either. When it finally ended, the specialist asked us to wait. So we waited. 10 minutes, 20, 30. Every passing minute made my imagination worse. Finally, the two doctors returned together. The older doctor pulled up a chair. Doctors only sit down when conversations become important. "Hannah," he folded his hands, "I don't believe you should go home today." I frowned. "Why?" "We're seeing signs of something rare." My heartbeat quickened. "How rare?" He smiled gently. "Rare enough that many obstetricians never encounter it." The room suddenly felt very small. "What is it?" "We're not certain yet." Those words frightened me even more. "But we suspect a developing placental vascular disorder." I stared at him blankly. "I don't understand. The placenta feeds oxygen and nutrients to your baby." "I know. We believe a small portion may be beginning to fail." I immediately looked at my stomach. But I feel fine. I know. The baby is moving. I know. So why does everyone look worried? The doctor's expression softened. Because sometimes this condition gives no warning until it becomes an emergency. Silence filled the room. Caleb finally asked the question neither of us wanted answered. What happens if she goes home? The doctor didn't speak immediately. Then he quietly said, there's a chance everything would remain stable. And if it doesn't, he took a slow breath. If blood flow suddenly decreases, your baby could lose oxygen very quickly. My eyes filled with tears. But I haven't done anything wrong. No, he answered immediately. This isn't your fault. He leaned slightly closer. Which is exactly why I don't want you leaving. The nurse entered carrying paperwork. I've arranged a room upstairs. I looked around the ultrasound room. Only 2 hours earlier, it had felt ordinary. Now it felt like the doorway between two completely different lives. Caleb helped gather our things. Neither of us spoke much. On the elevator ride to the maternity floor, he quietly wrapped his arm around my shoulders. We're going to be okay. I nodded. I wanted to believe him. The hospital room overlooked the parking lot. I watched people getting into their cars, families laughing, parents carrying balloons, visitors leaving after ordinary appointments. I wondered how many of them had walked into the hospital expecting a normal day, just like we had. That afternoon, more tests followed. Blood work, continuous fetal monitoring, repeated ultrasounds. Everything looked stable, almost reassuring. Even the nurses seemed optimistic. Around sunset, one young resident entered my room carrying my chart. She smiled. Everything actually looks encouraging. Relief flooded through me. So I can go home tomorrow? Before she could answer, the older doctor stepped into the room behind her. He glanced at the chart, then quietly shook his head. Not yet. The resident looked confused, but all today's testing is reassuring. I know, she hesitated. The fetal tracing is normal. I know. The blood work is normal. I know. She looked at him curiously. Then why keep her? He stared out the window for several seconds before answering. Because medicine isn't only about finding what's obvious. He looked back at Hannah. Sometimes it's about respecting the one thing that doesn't make sense. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound from the fetal monitor pulled my eyes open. Every movement from my baby made me whisper a silent prayer. Around 3 a.m, I felt something strange. Not pain, not contractions, just stillness. For the first time in months, my baby wasn't moving. I waited. 5 minutes, nothing. 10 minutes, still nothing. I pressed the call button. Within seconds, nurses rushed into the room. One reached for the monitor. Another called the doctor. The screen remained strangely quiet. Then someone whispered words that made the entire room explode into motion. We've lost the baby's heartbeat. And in that terrifying moment, I finally understood exactly why one doctor had refused to let me go home. We've lost the baby's heartbeat. Those 6 words didn't feel real. For one impossible second, nobody moved. Then the room exploded into motion. A nurse pushed the emergency button. Another grabbed the ultrasound machine from the hallway. Someone pulled oxygen tubing from the wall. I looked at Caleb. His face had turned completely white. What's happening? I cried. Nobody answered. The older doctor rushed into the room before anyone else. He didn't panic. That frightened me more. He immediately placed the ultrasound probe against my stomach. The screen flickered. Gray shadows filled the monitor. Everyone stared. The room was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Then, a tiny movement. There, the doctor whispered. I've got it. A faint heartbeat appeared. Weak, slow, but there. The nurses let out small breaths of relief. I burst into tears. Is he okay? The doctor never looked away from the screen, right now. He paused. Yes. He looked toward the nurse. Call the operating room. My heart dropped. Now? We're not waiting anymore. Within minutes, people filled the room. Consent forms. Medication, hospital bracelets, machines. Everything happened faster than my mind could follow. The older doctor finally looked at me. Hannah, I'm scared. I know. I thought everything looked better. So did we. He nodded toward the monitor. But this is exactly what I was worried about. He pointed to the image on the screen. The blood flow changed much faster than expected. Caleb squeezed my hand. If we'd gone home, the doctor answered before he finished the sentence, you probably wouldn't have reached another hospital in time. The room became silent. I closed my eyes. For the first time that day, I truly understood. His decision hadn't been cautious. It had saved our baby. Less than 20 minutes later, bright operating room lights surrounded me. The anesthesiologist spoke gently. The nurses moved quickly. Caleb sat beside my head. I'm here. I held his hand so tightly my fingers hurt. The surgery began. Everything felt strange. Pressure, pulling, voices behind the curtain. Then someone suddenly spoke. The cord isn't the problem. Another doctor answered. The placenta's separating. I heard the older doctor quietly say, exactly. No one else spoke for several seconds. Then, a tiny cry, weak at first, then louder. The entire room changed. Baby boy. A nurse smiled. He's breathing. Tears rolled down my face. Caleb kissed my forehead. We have a son. The nurse carried him toward us for only a moment. His tiny face was red, his eyes were closed, his little hand moved once before they carried him to the warmer. He needs some help breathing, someone explained. But he's responding beautifully. For the first time in hours, I smiled. The surgery continued another 40 minutes. When everything was finally finished, the doctor walked beside my bed into recovery. He looked exhausted. So, I whispered, what happened? He pulled up a chair. The placenta was beginning to detach. I frowned. But everyone said it was small. It was. Then why? He folded his hands. Because sometimes a very small problem becomes a very large emergency without warning. He showed me one of the ultrasound images. This tiny shadow. He pointed carefully, was the only clue. I stared at it. I couldn't even tell what I was looking at. I almost ignored it myself. You did? He nodded. It didn't fit. What do you mean? It wasn't behaving like the usual conditions we see. So why keep looking? He smiled slightly. Because medicine teaches us to trust evidence. He paused. But experience teaches us to investigate the things that don't make sense. I would remember those words for the rest of my life. Later that evening, I finally held my son. He weighed only 4 pounds and 11 ounces. Tiny, perfect. Caleb couldn't stop smiling. We still need a name. I laughed through my tears. I think he looks like Noah. Caleb grinned. I knew you'd change your mind. For the first time since entering the hospital, everything felt peaceful, or so I thought. The next morning, another doctor visited my room. She introduced herself as an internal medicine specialist. I'd like to discuss one of yesterday's scans. I frowned. The baby's scan? No. Mine? She nodded. While reviewing images before surgery, we noticed something unexpected. My heart immediately started racing again. What kind of something? A small abnormal area near your right kidney. I looked at Caleb. Neither of us understood. What does that mean? She smiled gently. It may be nothing. I almost laughed. I had begun to hate those words. But we'd like to perform another scan after you've recovered. The older doctor happened to walk into the room. He saw my expression immediately. What happened? The specialist explained. He quietly reviewed the report. Then his face became unusually serious. I'd like that scan done today. She looked surprised. Today? Yes. She's only 1 day after surgery. I know. It could easily wait several weeks. He slowly shook his head. I don't think it should. The specialist looked puzzled. What are you worried about? He stared at the report. I don't know yet. He looked toward me. But this is the second time something small has appeared exactly where it shouldn't. That afternoon, despite my recent surgery, they carefully wheeled me to radiology. The scan lasted nearly an hour. Nobody explained much. When it finished, I was taken back to my room. The waiting was unbearable. Caleb tried distracting me by talking about Noah, how tiny his fingers were, how loudly he cried, how proud he already looked. I smiled, but my thoughts kept returning to one question. Why another scan? Near sunset, 3 doctors entered my room together. 3. Not 1, not 2, 3. The older doctor closed the door behind them. No one smiled. He slowly pulled a chair beside my bed. My stomach tightened. Doctors don't bring 3 people into a room to deliver ordinary news. He looked directly into my eyes. Hannah. His voice was softer than I had ever heard it. The scan found something we were never looking for. I felt Caleb grab my hand. What is it? The doctor took one slow breath. Then he quietly said the single word that made the entire world around me disappear. Cancer. And suddenly, saving my baby's life was no longer the only battle we were about to fight. Cancer. The word echoed inside my head. Everything else disappeared. The hospital room, the machines, the sound of Noah crying softly in the bassinet beside the window. Even Caleb's hand holding mine felt far away. I stared at the doctor. I think, you have the wrong patient. I wanted him to smile, to apologize, to tell me the report belonged to someone else. Instead, he slowly shook his head. I wish I did. I looked down at Noah. He was sleeping peacefully, only 2 days old. How could a baby enter the world while his mother was hearing the worst news of her life? What kind of cancer? The older doctor exchanged a glance with the specialist. We believe it's an early-stage kidney tumor. Believe? We need one more biopsy to confirm. I grabbed onto that single word. Believe. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe this would become another misunderstanding. Maybe. The specialist gently interrupted my thoughts. The mass is very small. I looked up. So that's good? She nodded. Very good. It hasn't spread? We don't see any evidence that it has. For the first time since hearing the word cancer. I breathed. The older doctor leaned forward. Hannah, yes? If this had been discovered after symptoms appeared, he stopped. I already understood. It would have been different. He nodded. Very different. Caleb finally spoke. So, because of the pregnancy scan, the doctor looked at him. We found it months earlier than we normally would. The room became silent. I suddenly realized something impossible. One decision, one extra ultrasound, one doctor refusing to ignore a tiny shadow had saved Noah. And somehow, it had saved me too. The biopsy was scheduled 3 days later. Until then, no one could tell me anything with certainty. Those 3 days felt longer than the entire pregnancy. Friends came to visit, family brought flowers, everyone wanted to celebrate Noah. Very few people knew about the second diagnosis. We decided to keep it private. I wanted one thing, just one thing, to feel normal. On Noah's 4th day, I finally carried him outside for the first time. The hospital garden was quiet. Flowers surrounded the walking paths. A small fountain trickled nearby. Caleb pushed my wheelchair while I held Noah against my chest. He has your eyes, Caleb whispered. I smiled. I hope he gets your patience. He laughed softly. I hope he gets neither of our stubbornness. For a few minutes. Cancer disappeared. We were simply parents. Nothing more, nothing less. The biopsy happened the following morning. I was terrified. Not because it hurt, because I knew life would divide into 2 versions. Before the results, after the results. The waiting lasted almost 48 hours. Every knock on the hospital door made my heart race. Finally. The older doctor returned. This time, he came alone. That somehow frightened me more. He sat beside my bed. Hannah. I couldn't speak. The biopsy confirmed what we suspected. I closed my eyes. It is cancer. Tears slipped down my face, but he smiled. It's stage 1. I looked at him. That's good. It's the best news we could realistically hope for. He explained everything carefully. The tumor measured less than 2 centimeters. It hadn't spread. My blood work remained excellent. Because Noah had arrived safely, treatment could begin soon. The outlook was extremely encouraging. Then he said something I will never forget. If you had skipped this appointment, he paused, we probably wouldn't have found this for another year. Another year, I imagined the cancer growing silently inside me. No pain, no warning, no reason to suspect anything, just waiting. I suddenly felt cold. The doctor quietly handed me a tissue. You have every reason to be frightened. I don't want Noah to grow up without a mother. His expression softened. That's exactly why we're treating this now. 1 week later, I underwent surgery. The doctors removed the entire tumor. The operation was successful. Recovery wasn't easy. Every movement hurt. Holding Noah became difficult. Sometimes Caleb had to lift him into my arms. Those moments broke my heart. I wanted to be strong. Instead, I needed help. One evening, I apologized to Caleb. I'm sorry. He looked confused. For what? For giving you all of this. He almost laughed. You think Noah and you are burdens? I can't even carry him for long. He knelt beside my chair. Hannah. He gently placed Noah into my arms. You carried him for 8 months. He smiled. I can carry him for 8 weeks. I cried harder after hearing that than I had after surgery. Months slowly passed, the incision healed, my strength returned. Every follow-up scan looked perfect. Eventually, one doctor smiled and said the words I'd dreamed about hearing. No evidence of disease, cancer-free. I repeated those words in my head all night. Cancer-free. It felt unreal. Life finally settled. Noah grew quickly. He learned to smile, then laugh, then crawl across the living room faster than either of us expected. I thought the story was finally over. I was wrong. 6 months after surgery, the genetics to Rachel was only 22. Too young to hear the word cancer. Too young to sit across from an oncologist trying to understand treatment plans. Too young to look at our parents and wonder whether they were about to lose another daughter. When she called me, neither of us spoke for almost a minute. We just cried. Finally, she whispered, "You were right." I closed my eyes. I never wanted to be. They said, her voice cracked. They said if I had waited another year, it would have spread. The room became silent. I looked across the living room. Noah was taking his first steps between Caleb and the couch, laughing, completely unaware that one decision made before he was born had just saved his aunt's life too. Rachel's surgery was scheduled the following week. Unlike me, she wasn't pregnant. The operation was shorter. The doctors removed the entire tumor. Just like mine, it hadn't spread. When I visited her in recovery, she looked exhausted, but she smiled. You know what keeps running through my head? What? If that doctor had sent you home. I nodded slowly. I know. I probably never would have taken the test. She reached for my hand. You didn't just save Noah. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. You saved me. Months passed. Life slowly became ordinary again. Rachel recovered. I recovered. Noah celebrated his first birthday. For the first time in what felt like forever. Our family laughed without fear. Every 6 months, Rachel and I went for follow-up scans together. We turned hospital visits into little traditions. Coffee afterward, long conversations, a walk through the nearby park. Instead of reminding us what we'd survived, those appointments reminded us what we'd been given. Time. One afternoon, nearly 3 years later, I received another letter from the hospital. At first, I assumed it was another appointment reminder. Instead, it was something completely different. It informed me that Dr. Benjamin Carter, the doctor who refused to let me leave the hospital, was retiring after 38 years of practice. For a long time, I simply stared at the letter. I never even thanked him properly, I whispered. Caleb looked over my shoulder. Then let's go. The retirement celebration was open to former patients. A week later, we drove back to the same hospital where everything had begun. Walking through those doors felt strange. The waiting room looked exactly the same. The elevators, the maternity hallway, even the small coffee shop downstairs. Everything brought memories rushing back. Fear, hope, the sound of Noah's first cry. We followed signs to the hospital auditorium. It was filled with nurses, doctors, former patients, and families. People laughed together. Children ran through the room. Pictures from Dr. Carter's career covered one wall. Tiny babies he'd delivered, families he'd cared for, smiling faces from decades of medicine. Then I noticed a nurse walking toward me. She looked familiar. You must be Hannah, I smiled. You remember me? She laughed softly. Nobody forgot your case. She looked around the room. I'm sorry. For what? Dr. Carter couldn't make today's celebration. My heart sank. What happened? He officially retired 2 weeks early. I couldn't hide my disappointment. I really wanted to thank him. The nurse smiled. I hoped you'd come. She reached into a small drawer behind the welcome desk, then handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in careful handwriting. I looked up. What is this? He left several letters. For patients? She nodded. He said there were a few people he never forgot. My hands began trembling before I even opened it. Inside was a single handwritten page. Dear Hannah, doctors rarely learn what happens after patients leave the hospital. Most of the time, we simply hope life turns out well. Your family became one of the exceptions. I heard through colleagues that both you and your sister recovered beautifully. Nothing makes an old doctor happier than hearing news like that. People have called what happened a miracle. I see it differently. I wasn't trying to perform a miracle. I simply refused to ignore something that didn't make sense. Medicine begins with science. But experience teaches you that sometimes the smallest detail deserves the longest look. Never underestimate the value of one extra question, one extra test, one extra minute. Those small decisions often become someone else's entire future. Take good care of Noah. I have a feeling he'll remind you every day why difficult decisions are worth making. With gratitude, Benjamin Carter, I couldn't stop crying. Neither could Caleb, neither could Rachel, who had quietly walked up beside me while I was reading. The nurse smiled. He wrote every one of those letters himself. I folded the paper carefully. Years have passed since then. Noah is 8 now. He's healthy, curious, always asking questions. Rachel married last spring. She now volunteers with an organization that encourages families with inherited cancer syndromes to get early screening. Our parents still thank God every day that Rachel finally agreed to be tested. As for me, that letter hangs inside a simple wooden frame near our front door. Visitors often ask why it isn't tucked safely into a drawer. I always smile, because I need to read it sometimes, especially on difficult days, especially when life feels uncertain, especially when I'm tempted to believe that small choices don't matter. Whenever Noah asks about the framed letter, I tell him the same story. I tell him that before he was born, one doctor noticed something everyone else thought was too small to matter. I tell him that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes courage is simply refusing to walk away when everyone else already has. Sometimes courage looks like asking for one more scan, one more opinion, one more minute. People often call me lucky. They say I survived because fate was on my side. I don't argue, but deep inside, I know the truth. Luck didn't save my family. Knowledge didn't save my family by itself either. It began with knowledge. It continued with experience. And it changed everything because one doctor trusted the quiet voice inside him that whispered, "Look one more time." That single decision saved my son. It saved me. It saved my sister, and someday, when Noah is old enough to understand why that letter hangs by our front door, I'll tell him something I hope he never forgets. The biggest moments in life don't always begin with dramatic choices. Sometimes, they begin because one good person decides that good enough isn't good enough, when someone else's future is on the line meant called. I almost ignored the phone. Thankfully, I answered. The counselor introduced herself. "We've completed additional testing on your tumor." I frowned. I thought everything was finished. "Mostly." She paused. "We found something unexpected." My stomach tightened again. "What now?" "It appears your cancer carries a rare, inherited genetic mutation." I looked toward Noah playing on the floor. "What does that mean?" "It means this may run in families." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What happens now?" "We recommend testing your immediate relatives." "My parents?" "Yes." "My sisters?" "Yes." "My brother?" "Everyone." I couldn't believe it. The nightmare wasn't finished. It had simply become bigger. The following weekend, Caleb and I drove to my parents' home. I hadn't told them anything over the phone. Some conversations deserved to happen face to face. Mother hugged Noah before anyone else. Father smiled proudly. "You've both been through so much." I nodded. "You don't know everything." They looked at each other. I slowly explained the pregnancy, the emergency delivery, the cancer, the surgery. Then, the genetic mutation. Silence filled the room. My younger sister, Rachel, spoke first. "So we could have it too?" The genetic counselor had given me brochures. I placed them on the table. "We don't know." Father immediately nodded. "We'll all get tested." Rachel folded her arms. "I won't." Everyone turned toward her. "I feel perfectly healthy. It's only a blood test," Mother said gently. Rachel shook her head. "I don't want to spend my life looking for diseases." I reached across the table. "I felt healthy too." She looked away. "I'll think about it." That was all she would say. 3 weeks later, the test results arrived. My parents were negative. My brother was negative. One sister was negative, Rachel. Never took the test. She refused every phone call.